I'd never thought I'd say this, but Wizards printed a 5-color Legendary Spacecraft commander, and I absolutely love it. Infinite Guideline Station, one of the weirdest and most exciting 5-color commanders we've seen in a long time. For 5 mana, 1 of every color, we get a legendary artifact, a literal spacecraft, and it has 2 key abilities. The first being, whenever it enters a battlefield, we get to create a tapped 2/2 colorless artifact robot creature token for every multicolored permanent we control. In a deck like this, where we do play a ton of really cheap and efficient multicolor creatures, this means whenever we cast our commander, we will get to create a small army of robots. The second ability is that it has the Station mechanic, a new mechanic from the newest Edge of Eternities magic set. Station means we can tap any creature we control to add that creature's power in the form of charge counters onto Infinite Guideline Station. We can only use the Station mechanic on sorcery speed, meaning we can't tap creatures in an opponent's turn to actually station this card. Whenever we get to 12 or more charge counters, our commander will actually turn into a creature. A massive 7/15 flying body, which is already really crazy. And this is where this commander gets absolutely nuts. Whenever it attacks when it is stationed, we get to draw 1 card for each multicolored permanent we control. So the game plan for this deck is really simple. First, we want to flood the board with a ton of really efficient and cheap multicolored creatures. Then we want to cast our commander and generate an army of robot tokens. Then we use the robots we just generated and any other creatures we control to actually station our commander. Then we want to swing with our stationed commander and we will draw an insane amount of cards. But that's just the surface. This deck leans really heavily into multicolored creatures, and here's why. The more multicolored permanents we control, the more robots we will generate whenever our commander enters, and the more cards we will draw whenever we attack with our commander. But it doesn't stop there. I've also decided to include a Legends Matter subteam in the deck because most of the multicolored creatures we are already running are legendary creatures anyways. That means we can run synergy cards like Joda the Unifier, and we can also run cards that actually care about us casting historic spells. And yes, legendary creatures are historic cards. One of the coolest things about this commander is that you can totally choose how you want to build it. Some players might want to build it around some really big 5-color spells, but in this version of the deck I decided to focus on some cheap multicolored creatures that actually help us ramp, so we can get our commander on the battlefield and stationed as soon as possible. Because once you have an army of robots and you can start drawing 5, 6, 7 cards every single turn, the game is basically over. This honestly was one of the most challenging decks that I've ever built, because the commander doesn't give you a clear direction as to where to take the deck. Just playing a bunch of multicolored cards isn't really a strategy, it's just some sort of like an open-ended thing. I spent a lot of time working on and refining this deck, but I'm really happy with how it turned out. I wanted to do research for this deck and just look at what other people were playing in this deck, but there's basically nothing out there. Barely any guides on Moxfield, no Reddit posts, no real guides on how to build this commander. And that's what makes this video even more exciting. You're getting one of the first in-depth deck decks on Infinite Guideline Station. I managed to build this deck on a €100 budget, which honestly feels like an achievement in itself. If you don't care about the budget, make sure you stay around until the end of the video. I've got a lengthy upgrade section both on the 5-color Manabase and how to improve it, and a section where I will be mentioning more expensive cards you can totally include in the deck to push it to its limit. As per usual, I will be going over every single card I decided to include in the deck and explaining why I decided to include it. This video is divided up in 7 categories: the multicolored creatures, acceleration, support and card advantage, interaction and protection, the lands, the upgraded mana base, and the upgrade section. Let's get started with the multicolored creatures. These cards really are the heart of the deck. The more multicolored permanents we control, the more robots we will create with our commander, and the more cards it will draw us. And obviously we're not just playing a bunch of random multicolored creatures. All of these are efficient and synergistic cards that all push our game plan forward in some way. Riss the Redeemed, a 1 mana 1/1 elf. The hybrid mana cost basically means that you can pay either a green or a white mana to cast this creature, and thanks to the hybrid mana cost, this actually counts as a multicolored creature, synergizing perfectly with our commander. Riss also has 2 activated abilities which are really good with what we're trying to do in this deck. For 3 mana and tapping him, we get to create a 1/1 green and white elf Elf Warrior token. Since these tokens are both green and white, they will also count as multicolored permanents for Infinite Guideline Station, resulting both in more robots and more card draw. And for 6 mana and tapping him, we get to create a copy of each creature token we control. So if you generated some elf tokens with Riss, you can use this to double them. If you created a ton of robots with our commander, you can just tap Riss, invest some mana and also double them. Riss is just a fantastic 1-drop creature that can generate a token army all by himself and also acts as a game finisher for any creature token based deck. Basim Ibn Shak, a 2-mana 2/2 legendary assassin. Whenever this creature is on the battlefield and we cast a historic spell, we get to draw a card, and this creature will become unblockable until the end of turn. Artifacts, legendaries and sagas are all legendary spells. As you will see later in this video, a ton of the creatures we play in this deck are actually legendary creatures. And whenever we cast any of them, Basim will draw us a card. This ability triggers only once per turn, but honestly that's just perfectly fine value on a 2-drop creature. A nice little benefit this card has is whenever he deals combat damage to a player, it gets a +1/+1 counter, synergizing perfectly with the unblockable effect he gets whenever we cast a historic permanent. You might think the power this creature has is irrelevant, but the more power it has, the easier we can actually station our commander. Corpse Knight, a 2-mana 2/2 zombie knight. And he has a really strong but really simple passive ability. Whenever any creature enters the battlefield under our control, each opponent will lose 1 life. Just imagine having this on the battlefield, 4 other multicolored creatures, and then you decide to cast your commander. You will then get a total of 6 robots created whenever your commander enters the battlefield, 1 robot for your commander itself because it's also a multicolored permanent on the battlefield, and then another 5 for each other multicolored permanent we control. Corpse Knight will then deal a total of 6 damage to each one of your opponents, which is honestly really good value. As you will see later in this video, we do play some ways to actually blink our commander. Blinking means making it leave the battlefield and then enter the battlefield again. When we blink our commander, we will get a new enter the battlefield trigger and we will get to create more robots. If you then have Corpse Knight on the field and you can do this a couple of times, Corpse Knight will just win you the game. Pretty good value for just a 2-drop creature. Sig, River Cutthroat, a 2-mana 1/3 merfolk creature. At the end of turn, if an opponent lost 3 or more life, we get to draw a card. This ability might seem really weak on paper, but let me explain why this is an absolutely crazy card. First of all, this card says at the end of turn, not just the end of our turn. So even if it's not your turn and 2 opponents are just swinging at each other and one of them loses 3 life, we still get to draw a card. If for example during an opponent's turn they decide to crack a fetch land to get a shock land and pay 2 life to make it enter untapped, they will also have lost 3 life, and at the end of their turn we will get to draw a card. If an opponent plays any of the MDFC lands and pays 3 life to make them enter untapped, we get to draw a card at the end of their turn. Sig is a really insane value creature, and usually in 1 turn cycle he will draw you somewhere between 2 to 4 cards, which is honestly once again really good value for just a 2-drop creature. And obviously since we are swinging with a 7/15 flying creature ourselves and an army of robots, we can just deal combat damage during our turn. If we then have Sig on the battlefield, we will also draw a card. Abuelo, Ancestral Echo, a 3-mana 2/2 flying creature with Ward 2. Already an evasive body that if your opponents want to target it, they have to pay 2 additional mana to do so. And for 3 mana, he has an activated ability that allows us to blink any artifact or creature we control. Meaning for just paying the 3, we get to exile that target creature or artifact and it will return under our control at the beginning of the next end step. This is a perfect way to re-trigger any ETB effects we run in the deck. You can use this to blink our Wood Elves to get another land into play. You can use this to blink a Coiling Oracle, just allowing you to draw a card or even ramp your mana. But the main purpose of playing this card is obviously blinking our space station. Whenever we do so, we will get a new trigger and we will get to generate a ton of robots. You can also use this ability to dodge any sort of spot removal. Let's say for example you have your commander on the battlefield and an opponent is casting a murder. You can just activate Abuelo, blink our space station, murder won't have any target anymore, the spell will fizzle, and then we will get our commander back. Blinking is a really cool mechanic you can use in a ton of ways. Palaji Wayfarer, the 3-mana 2/4 creature with a really unique ability. This card is all colors at all times. This means he will count towards all colors for all the multicolor synergies we play in this deck. A 3 mana, 5 color creature is honestly already really good in this deck, but on top of that it even has a second ability, which is even crazier. All multicolored spells we cast get Convoke. Convoke basically means whenever we cast a multicolored spell, we can tap any creature we control to help pay for the mana cost. When we tap a creature, we can choose to reduce the cost of the spell by 1 generic mana or by 1 mana of any of the colors that the tapped creature has. Since this card is all 5 colors, when we are convoking, we can tap this for 1 mana of any color. Since we are a really creature heavy list and we have a commander that produces a ton of robots, Convoke will always be really good in this type of deck. General Ferrous Rockerick, a 3 mana 3/1 creature with hexproof for monocolored, meaning if your opponents want to target this creature with any monocolored spell, they just can't. And if you swing with this creature, it can be blocked by monocolored creatures, and monocolored creatures aren't able to deal damage to this creature. On top of that already really awesome body, he has the best ability of any card in this type of deck. Whenever we cast a multicolored spell, we get to create a 4/4 red and white golem token. As you can imagine, in a 5-color deck that's all about playing multicolored spells, this ability is just broken. You will be generating a ton of 4/4 golems, which are really huge creature tokens, and these tokens also are multicolored permanents since they are both red and white. So if you can drop this creature really early, play some multicolored spells, and then get your commander out, you will get an absolutely insane trigger on Infinite Guideline Station, and you will get to create a million robots, resulting in you having a board filled with 4/4 golem tokens and a board filled with 2/2 robot tokens, which you can then use to easily station our commander, and when you then swing with it, you will draw like a million cards because you have the multicolored golems and any other multicolored permanent. If you want to build an Infinite Guideline Station deck, this card is the first card I'd include. It's just the best card in the deck by far. Shardless Agent, a 3 mana 2/2 artifact creature with a Cascade mechanic. Cascade basically means whenever you cast this card, you get to exile the top cards of your library until you hit a non-land card that costs less than this creature. Then when you hit a spell that costs 2 or less mana, you can cast it for free. Shardless Agent is just a really efficient creature in this deck because for 3 mana we get a multicolor creature that counts towards our commander, and it will cascade into a smaller monocolor creature or even one of our ram spells. Shardless Agent basically gives you a multicolored body plus a free spell cast for just 3 mana. Really efficient creature in this deck. Soul Herder, a 3 mana 1/1 spirit. Like I said, in this deck we do play a couple of blink effects, and Soul Herder is one of them. At the beginning of our end step, we may exile a creature we control. Then it instantly returns to the battlefield. Like I mentioned when I was talking about Abuelo, this is just a perfect card to blink your Coiling Oracle, your Wood Elves, just to get some extra value out of those. But the main reason why we play this is because it allows us to blink our commander every single turn. When we do so, it will leave, it will enter, and it will generate us a ton of robots. Just some really efficient value that keeps recurring as long as your opponents don't deal with this creature. And on top of that, whenever a creature on the battlefield is put into exile, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. So every time we blink something with this effect, or an opponent is playing some exile removal spells, this creature body will just keep on growing, which we can then use to swing at our opponents or station our commander. Torrens, Fist of the Angels, a 3 mana 2/2 creature with a training mechanic. Training basically means whenever you attack with a creature with training and another creature that has greater power, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on the attacking creature with training. So whenever you swing with a big creature and a small training creature, the training creature will just grow a little bit in power. The training mechanic honestly is not the reason why we play it. We play it for its second ability. Whenever we cast any creature spell, we get to generate a 1/1 green-white warrior token with training. In this deck, we play a total of 35 creatures, and every time we cast one of them, we will get to generate a multicolor token, which then in turn will give us more robots with our commander and will draw us more cards with our commander. And later in the game, if you actually start swinging with your commander and you also swing with these small little creature tokens, the training mechanic will just grow them in power, and if you have enough of them, you might actually do some damage with them. The Adrix and Neff, Twin Casters. It's a 4 mana 2/2 legendary creature with Ward 2. And honestly, this card is a real value engine. Whenever one or more tokens would be created under our control, we get to create twice that many tokens instead. This effect is honestly just ridiculous in this deck, because whenever we cast our commander, we will usually be creating somewhere between 5 to 10 robot tokens. If we then have this card on the field, it will be somewhere between 10 to 20 robot tokens, just doubling up on the fantastic value our commander already generates. And it doesn't stop there. As you saw already in this deck, we play a ton of other cards that also generate tokens in this deck. Torrens, General Ferrous Rockerick, and we also play a ton of cards in this deck that actually generate treasure tokens, which also will be doubled up by this card. Aragorn the Uniter, a 4 mana 5/5 legendary creature and probably one of the best inclusions you can have in any multicolored deck. Aragorn has 4 triggered abilities, and each one of them will trigger depending on what colors any spell you cast have. Whenever you cast a white spell, you get to generate a 1/1 soldier token, just adding to our board state. Whenever you cast a blue spell, you get to scry 2, allowing you to manipulate the top cards of your library and actually giving us some sort of control over what cards we draw. Whenever we cast a red spell, we get to deal 3 damage to target opponent, acting as some sort of a free lightning bolt we can shoot at someone's face. And whenever we cast a green spell, target creature gets +4/+4 until the end of turn. Basically a juiced up version of Giant Growth. Honestly, all of these effects are really fantastic. It's a really versatile card that will grant you a ton of value in a ton of different ways. Fun little fact about Aragon, if you cast a multicolored spell that's, let's say, all 5 colors, you will get a trigger on every single one of these abilities. Let's say, for example, we have Aragon on the field and we decide to cast our commander. Not only will we get a really huge spaceship and an army of robots, but in addition to that, we also get to create a 1/1 token, scry 2, shoot a lightning bolt at someone, and give a creature a really huge stat boost. And as you already saw in the video, and we got a lot more coming up, we do play a ton of multicolored spells. So the value that Aragon will generate in this type of deck will just be insane. This is by far one of the strongest and the most fun cards in the entire deck. Arkelos, Lagoon Mystic, a 4 mana 2/4 Turtle Shaman. Turtle Shaman is a pretty cool creature type, I'm not gonna lie. As long as Arkelos is tapped, every other permanent entering the battlefield will also enter the battlefield tapped. And as long as Arkelos is untapped, every other permanent will enter the battlefield untapped. This card has a ton of uses in this deck, and honestly it is a pretty hard card to use perfectly. If you play the budget version of this deck, a ton of the lands in our mana base will actually enter the battlefield tapped. If you have an untapped Arkelos on the field, all your lands will even enter untapped, which is just insane value already. When our commander enters the battlefield, we get to create robot tokens, but all of them will be tapped. If you have an Arkelos, they will also enter untapped, and you will instantly be able to use them to station our commander. Arkelos doesn't only control how our permanents enter the battlefield though, it also works for your opponents. So if he is untapped and an opponent plays a tapped land, their tapped land will also enter untapped. If Arkelos is tapped, all things that your opponents play also enter the battlefield tapped, be it creatures, lands, tokens, whatever, everything will enter tapped, essentially making things like fetch lands, treasure tokens completely useless. Luckily, in this type of deck, we do have a way to tap Arkelos whenever we want. Let's say we have our commander on the field and we are about to pass the turn with an untapped Arkelos. We can just tap Arkelos to station our commander, add 2 charge counters to it, and whenever we pass the turn, he will be tapped. So we will cripple and slow down our opponents this way. Like I said, it's a really hard card to use and you will have to get used to it, but especially in the budget version of this deck, it is just fantastic. Allowing all your tap lands to actually enter untapped and your robots to instantly be available to station your commander. Brea, Therium Shaper, a 4 mana 4/4 legendary artifact creature. Whenever Brea enters the battlefield, we get to generate 2 1/1 blue flying topter tokens. Already really solid value in itself. Whenever you play Brea, you already get 6 power to station our commander with. But the main reason why we play Brea is her activated ability. For 2 generic mana and sacrificing 2 artifacts we control, we get to choose one of 3 options. We can make her deal 3 damage to target player or planeswalker. Firecracker, acting as some sort of a lightning bolt we can throw at someone's face and use to win the game. We can use it as some sort of a removal tool by giving target creature -4/-4 until the end of turn, which, yeah, honestly will deal with most problematic creatures on the board. Or we can use it to gain 5 life. If you are under a ton of pressure, 5 life might actually make the difference and keep you in the game. Brea is just a value engine we can use later in the game to actually turn all of our robot tokens we don't need anymore into immense value. Early in the game, she's just some fodder you can use to station our commander, but later in the game, she'll prove to be really valuable. What I like most about Brea is her versatility and just allowing you to choose the option you need at the given board state. Versatility and options are really what make Magic cards go from good to great. Inga and Esika, a 4-mana 4/4 human god. Passively, this card will give itself and any other creatures we control vigilance and the ability to tap them and add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. That mana can only be spent to cast creature spells. As you saw by now, we will be playing a ton of really cheap creatures, and Inga and Esika will just all turn them into mana dorks. This really helps with both our ramp and our color fixing. Since we do play a creature heavy deck, the fact that we can only use this mana on creature spells usually doesn't even matter. And on top of that, whenever we cast a creature spell, if 3 or more mana was made by creatures to pay for the cost of that spell, we get to draw a card. Just imagine it like this. You have a board filled with creatures, be it robots or some other multicolor creatures. You drop Inga and Esika, you will be able to tap all of them for mana. You use that mana, you play like 2 additional creatures, and you will get to draw 2 cards. Inga and Esika is by far one of the most valuable cards in this entire deck. Jetmir, Nexus of Revels. This is one of the win cons we play in the deck. It's a 4-mana 5/4 legendary cat demon, and he gives all our creatures a buff depending on how much creatures we control. If we control 3 or more creatures, he will give all our creatures +1/0 and vigilance. On top of that, if we control 6 or more creatures, all our creatures will also get an additional +1/0 and trample. And the ultimate form, if we control 9 or more creatures, all our creatures will get an additional +1/0 and double strike. Jetmir is just a fantastic game finisher in any deck that can create a ton of creature tokens, which obviously we can easily do whenever we cast our commander. If we then control Jetmir and at least 8 other creatures, all our robots will now be 5/2 vigilance trample double strike creatures, which is honestly absolutely insane and will win you the game on the spot if you can swing with them. And on top of that, it's not just the robot tokens. We do play a lot of really cheap multicolor creatures like you already saw, and most of the acceleration section in this deck are also really cheap mana dork creatures. If you can give them +3/0 vigilance trample double strike, they will also turn into lethal weapons. Every time I managed to resolve Jetmir and I had a couple of creatures on the board, I was instantly able to take at least 1 opponent out of the game. Joyra, Weatherlight Captain, a 4-mana 3/3 legendary human. Whenever we cast a historic spell, we get to draw a card. Like you've already seen by now, almost all the creatures I just went over in this section alone are all legendary creatures. When you have Joyra on the field, whenever you cast one of these creatures, we will be able to draw a card. Even just casting our commander, which we will always be doing at some point in the game, will even draw us a card. Joyra is basically the unrestricted version of Bashim Ibn Shak, because she doesn't have the once per turn restriction. Especially later in the game, if you do have access to a ton of mana, you can just keep chaining these cheap legendary creatures and Joyra will be drawing you an insane amount of cards. Knight of New Alara, another one of the win-con creatures in this deck. Each other multicolor creature we control will get +1/+1 for each of its colors. The stat boost that this card will give to each one of our creatures is absolutely insane. 90% of the creatures in this deck are at least 2 colors, so this creature will already give a +2/+2 stat boost to them. But it gets even more ridiculous. Let me give you some examples. The tokens that General Ferrus Rockerick will generate us are now 6/6 golem token creatures. Falaji Wayfarer will now be a 7/9 body because it is all 5 creature types. Our commander, which usually is a massive 7/15 creature, will now be a 12/20 creature. If you can get your commander to this amount of power and can just get 2 hits in, this will result in 24 commander damage, and 21 commander damage is enough to take someone out of the game. On top of that, your creatures being boosted in power means that you can only use like 2 or 3 creatures to just station our commander commander in one go. Knights of New Alaga is an auto-inclusion in any multicolored based deck. It really is that strong. Joda the Unifier, the classic Legends Matter commander. If you've never seen Joda, let me introduce you to him. Joda is one of the strongest commanders ever printed, especially if you decide to go with the Legends Matter subteam, which basically means just playing as much legendary creatures as possible. It is already a 5-color creature, which in this deck is already really good because it synergizes really well with any of the other cards in this deck. Passively, all our legendary creatures will get +X, where X is the number of legendary creatures we control. And Joda is already legendary himself, so you will get at least +1/+1. But trust me, in this deck it'll be a ton more. I'll just share my experience. Every time, by the time I resolved Joda, I controlled at least 4 other legendary creatures, resulting in a +5/+5 stat boost for all my legendary creatures. And since most of these creatures only cost like 2 to 3 mana, you now have a board filled with really cheap creatures with really big bodies, which you can then use to swing with or to really easily station your commander with. And it doesn't stop there. Joda also has another triggered ability. Whenever we cast a legendary spell from our hand, we get to flip the top cards of our library until we hit a non-land legendary card with lesser mana value. Then we are allowed to cast the hit spell for free without paying its mana cost. Joda basically rewards you for playing legendary creatures by giving you the option to play even more legendary creatures, which then in turn will result in a bigger stat boost for all of your legendary creatures. Joda is a really insanely fun commander, and it was the first commander I wanted to do a 5-color deck about. That was until I saw the Space Station. All jokes aside, Joda is just a fantastic inclusion in the deck just because we run this many legendary cards. Talking about really big 5-color creatures that can win you the game on the spot, Nif Mizzet Reborn. This version of Nif Mizzet is a 6/6 flying creature that's all colors and has a really powerful enter the battlefield trigger, especially for multicolored decks. Whenever he enters a battlefield, we get to reveal the top 10 cards of our library. Then for each color pair, we get to choose a card that's exactly that color type. Then we get to put all the chosen cards in our hand and the rest goes to the bottom of our library. This is honestly a really weird wording, so let me just explain how it works in practice. In Magic, you have a total of 10 color pairs, being all 10 of the guilds. If you, for example, hit multiple Selesnya cards, you can only pick one of those. If you, for example, hit a 5-color spell, you can't pick it because it has to be exactly a 2-mana color pair. Then you get to put all the chosen cards in your hand. Once again, like I said, it's a really weird ability, but usually whenever you cast Nif Mizzet, this translates into us drawing at least 5 cards, which honestly is a really insane ETB trigger for just a 5-mana creature. As you saw, we do play a lot of blink effects, and Nif Mizzet just is the perfect target to blink because every time you'll do so, you will be able to generate a huge amount of card advantage. And the last card in this section is Imskir Iron Eater. It's a whopping 8-mana 5/5 creature with affinity for artifacts, meaning its cost is reduced by 1 generic mana for each artifact we control. The entire purpose of including this card in the deck is first resolving our commander, the Infinite Guideline Station, creating a ton of robots, and then we will be able to cast a huge card like this for just 2 mana. Whenever Imskir enters the battlefield, we get to lose X life and draw X cards, X being half the amount of artifacts we control rounded down. So just imagine playing your commander, you get to create 5 robots. Imskir's cost will be reduced by 6 because you have 5 artifacts plus your commander, which is also an artifact. You just play Imskir for 2 mana, you will lose 3 life and draw 3 cards, which honestly is really insane value. Later in the game, if you do control more robots, you will take a huge hit in life whenever you play Imskir, but the amount of card advantage you get is totally worth it. Life is a resource anyway, people. Use it. On top of that, Imskir also has an activated ability for 4 mana that allows us to sacrifice an artifact we control to deal damage equal to its converted mana cost. And we can choose to deal this damage to any target. So we can actually start sacrificing our artifacts to destroy some creatures on the board or to ping some opponents down. As you could have guessed, we can't sacrifice our robot tokens for this, since tokens don't have a converted mana cost because they will just deal 0 damage whenever we use this ability on them. That being said, we do play a couple of mana rocks and we can even toss our commander at someone's face to deal 5 damage. If you enjoyed this type of content and you want to support me and the channel, check out the YouTube membership program. All members will get early access to the decklists of these type of videos before the videos go live. live. You will get voting rights in the Discord server, so you actually can help decide on what commander I will be doing this type of video about next. You get access to some exclusive member-only chat rooms in the Panzer MTG Discord server. You'll be able to use some of these awesome Panzer MTG emojis anywhere on YouTube and Discord. And at the highest tier, you can even submit your deck for a review by me. If you want to check it out, click the join button below the video or check the link in the description below. Big love to all the current YouTube members. Your support is truly appreciated. Next up, we have the acceleration section. As you can imagine, in a 5-color deck that plays a huge spaceship as a commander, we do need a ton of mana. Luckily for us, there are a ton of really cheap and efficient multicolored mana dorks, which will help us fix our colors, cast our commander as early as possible, and they will benefit us by generating us more robots and allowing us to draw more cards. Black Market Tycoon. A 2-mana 2/2 creature that we can tap to create us a treasure token. This is one of the weirder mana dorks in the deck because it doesn't directly generate us mana. Instead, it gives us treasure tokens. Honestly, this is a benefit because a card that just generates you mana, you have to use it or you will lose it at the end of the phase. With this card, you can just create a treasure token, pass the turn, and by the time it's your turn again, you will still have the treasure token available for later use. At the beginning of our upkeep, this card will deal 2 damage to us for each treasure token we control. So if you do decide to stack up some treasure tokens with this dude, every time it is your upkeep, you will take 2 damage per treasure token you left lying on the battlefield. But in most cases, we will be using the treasure tokens it generates instantly, so this isn't really a downside for us. Coiling Oracle, a 2-mana 1/1 snake that whenever it enters a battlefield allows us to reveal the top card of our library. If the card is a land card, we get to put it onto the battlefield tapped, accelerating our mana. If the revealed card is not a land, we just instead get to put it into our hand, essentially just drawing the card. A 2-mana multicolored body, which is just perfect for a commander that will either ramp us or give us card advantage. Kiora's Follower, a 2-mana 2/2 merfolk with an awesome activated ability. We can tap this creature to untap any other permanent. Baseline, this card just functions as a mana dork. You can tap a land for mana, untap it with this card, and you can tap the land again, accelerating our mana by 1. But in this deck, this card has a ton more uses than that. If we have a creature that taps for more than 1 mana, we can just use Kiora's Follower to untap it and generate double the mana it would normally generate. If we enchant one of our lands with a card that allows us to produce additional mana, we can just untap that land with Kiora's Follower and tap it for double the mana once again. If you have a huge creature body with 6 power on the battlefield and you really want to station your commander, you can just tap it once to station, untap with Kiora's Follower, tap it again, and you will have 12 charge counters on your commander. Kiora's Follower really is one of the more versatile mana dorks in this deck. It probably even has like 20 more interactions in this deck that I didn't even discover yet. Farseek, a 2-mana sorcery speed spell that allows us to search our library for any island, mountain, plains or swamp card. Everything but a forest basically. Then we get to put that land onto the battlefield tapped, accelerating our mana by 1 turn. Even in the budget version of this deck, we do play a ton of lands with the basic land types. Farseek then just allows you to get the color pair you need onto the battlefield depending on what colors of cards you have in your hand. Rootcoil Creeper, another 2-mana mana dork that will tap for 1 mana of any color. It also has 2 other activated abilities, but I won't be covering these since we can't actually use it. It interacts with cards that have flashback or casting cards from the graveyard, but we can't actually do it in the deck. Just a 2-mana multicolored creature that taps for any color. Perfectly fine in this deck. Ruby, Daring Tracker, a 2-mana 2/2 creature with haste, and we can also tap it to add 1 red or green mana to our mana pool. Another awesome multicolored mana dork that has the benefit that we can use it instantly the moment it hits the battlefield thanks to the haste. Also has the nice little benefit whenever we attack with Ruby and another creature we control with power 4 or greater, Ruby will get +2/+2 until the end of turn. This probably won't happen in a ton of games, but if you are swinging for lethal and you actually need the 2 damage, Ruby might just come in to win you the game. Arcane Signet, a simple 2-mana artifact that we can tap to add mana of any color to our mana pool. I know it's not a multicolor creature, but it actually does help a ton with our color fixing in the deck. Sky Serpent Seeker, a 2-mana 1/1 flying death touch creature, which honestly in itself is already a really annoying body to deal with for your opponents. If an opponent controls a 20/20 flying dragon creature, they will never be swinging at you whenever you control this creature, because you will just block, the death touch will destroy the dragon. On top of the fantastic keywords, it also has the exhaust ability. Exhaust basically means you can only use this ability once per game. But honestly, that's more than enough because the ability is just crazy. For 4 generic mana, you get to reveal the top cards of your deck until you reveal 2 land cards. Then you get to put those 2 lands onto the battlefield tapped. And you also get to put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. 4 mana to get 2 lands from your deck straight onto the battlefield is excellent acceleration, especially if it is in the form of lands. I'm gonna be honest with you, before creating this deck, I didn't even know this card existed. You can be sure from now on, if I am in Simic colors and I need some acceleration piece, I will be including this card in the deck. The value is just way too good not to play. Trace of Abundance, a 2 mana enchant land card. The enchanted land will get Shroud, meaning no one can target it with any spells or abilities, not even we ourselves. Whenever the enchanted land is tapped for mana of any color, we get to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool in addition to the normal mana it produced. So this enchantment will basically make sure we can tap the enchanted land for 2 mana instead of 1. The fact that this enchantment also counts as a multicolored permanent for our commander is just fantastic. Loto, Corrupt Sheriff. 2 mana, 2/1 halfling creature with probably one of the best abilities ever printed in Magic. Whenever any player casts their second spell in a turn, we get to lose 1 life and we get to create a treasure token. I've talked about Loto in many of my previous videos, and Loto is just a broken card in my opinion. If you can drop Loto as early as turn 2 and you pass the turn to your opponent, every turn cycle you will generate between 1 to 3 free treasure tokens. The fact that this card comes down as early as turn 2 is absolutely ridiculous. And he doesn't only trigger off your opponents casting their second spell in a turn. Whenever we ourselves cast a second spell in a turn, we will also be generating a treasure token, which we can then instantly use to cast even more spells. Loto might feel really weird and out of place in this deck, but the amount of treasure tokens he will generate you is just absolutely ridiculous. There's really no reason not to play him. Chromatic Lantern. This 3 mana artifact can be tapped to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. Passively, it will also give all the lands we control a new line of text that says tap this land to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. So both a 3 mana rock that accelerates us because we can't tap it itself, and color fixing in this type of deck will never be a problem anymore because you can't tap any of your lands for any color. Honestly, I don't really like Chromatic Lantern that much, but if you do decide to play the budget version of this deck with a budget mana base, you do need cards like this just to get the right colors to play your multicolored spells. Cultivate, a 3 mana sorcery that allows you to search your library for 2 basic land cards. You get to put one of them onto the battlefield tapped and one of them into your hand. This card will both accelerate our mana by 1 turn, and it will ensure the next turn you do have a basic land in your hand to drop. Since we are a 5-color deck, you can kind of plan what kind of colors you will need in the coming turns depending on the cards you have in your hand, and you can just go fetch up the basics you need for the coming turns. Dryad of the Elysian Grove, a 3 mana enchantment creature. Passively, this card allows us to play 1 additional land on every single one of our turns. So instead of just having 1 land drop per turn, you can now drop 2 lands per turn, essentially translating extra acceleration. And on top of that, it will also make all the lands we control have every single basic land type in addition to its other types. What this means is that we can tap any of our lands for any of the colors we want, since all our lands will be swamps, mountains, islands, plains, and forests, functioning somewhat in the same way as Chromatic Lantern does. Also, if you play a check land that checks if you control a land of a specific type, all your lands will now count toward check lands because they will have all land types. Enduring Vitality, a 3 mana enchantment creature from the Duskborn set. It's a 3/3 creature with vigilance, and it will give all creatures we control an additional ability that we can tap them to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. This basically turns every creature we control into a mana dork we can tap for any color, both accelerating us and fixing our 5 colors. As you've seen by now, we will always be controlling a ton of cheap creatures on the board, let alone later in the game. If we have an army of robots generated by our commander, we will all be able to use them for mana. So both a great card early in the game and later in the game. And all of the enchantment creatures from Duskmourn have the same effect. Whenever they get removed as a creature, they will just hit the graveyard and return to the battlefield as an enchantment, making this a really obnoxious and annoying card to actually deal with. Fey Burrow Elder, a 3 mana Selesnya creature with vigilance. This creature will get +1/+1 for each color amongst permanents we control. Since this creature is a 2-color creature himself, it will always have a base stat of 2/2. Aside from being a really huge vigilance body in this type of deck, we play it for its step ability. For each color amongst permanents we control, we get to add 1 mana of that color to our mana pool. This basically means if you only control this creature, it will already tap for 2 mana, 1 green and 1 white. If you have a total of 4 colors on permanents you control, this creature will generate you 4 mana. And for example, if you control your commander, you can tap this creature for 5 mana, 1 of each color. A 3 mana mana dork that has a huge vigilance body and you can tap to add somewhere between 2 to 5 mana to your mana pool is honestly a really good deal. Relic of Legends, a 3 mana mana rock we can tap to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool, helping us with ramp and with color fixing. And like I mentioned throughout the video, we do play a Legends Matter subteam in the deck, and this is a perfect card for it. Aside from its tap ability to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool, we can also tap any untapped legendary creature who we control to add 1 extra mana of any color to our mana pool. The amount of mana you are able to generate with this artifact in this deck is absolutely crazy. Let's say you control 3 legendary creatures, which honestly in this deck you will do all the time. You then play a Relic of Legends, which you can tap itself to add 1 mana to your mana pool, and then you can tap all 3 legendary creatures to also add mana to your mana pool. So for just a 3 mana mana rock, you actually get to add 4 mana to your mana pool in 1 single turn. If you've never played Relic of Legends in any of your decks, this is your call to action. Just start including it in your decks. Even if you don't play that much legendary creatures, it is a really good mana rock. Spelunking, a 3 mana enchantment. Whenever Spelunking enters the battlefield, we get to draw a card. Then, after we drew the card, we get to put 1 land card from our hand straight onto the battlefield. So it both functions as some sort of card advantage by replacing itself and drawing us a card, and then accelerating our mana by allowing us to play an additional land that turn. Already a pretty good card, but we really play it for the last passive ability. Lands we control enter the battlefield untapped. Especially if you're going for the budget version of this deck, Spelunking just is a must include card in the deck. Most of the cards in the budget Manabase will enter the battlefield tapped and will slow you down by 1 turn. With a card like Spelunking, they will all enter untapped and you will have access to your mana and your colors 1 turn faster. Obviously, if you don't care about the budget, I do have a replacement for this card in the upgrade section later in the video. Widespread Thieving, another 3 mana enchantment we play in the deck. This card has the Hideaway 5 mechanic, meaning whenever you play it, you get to look at the top 5 cards of your library and you can actually hide away a card under this card, which you can then cast for free if you meet the requirements needed for this card's hideaway mechanic. Whenever we cast a multicolored spell, when this enchantment is on the battlefield, we get to create a treasure token. So every multicolored spell we cast will accelerate our mana. Whenever this ability triggers, we are allowed to pay 5 mana, 1 of each color. When we do, we get to cast the exiled card by the hideaway mechanic for free. Even without the hideaway mechanic, this would already be a fantastic card in the deck, because we will be casting a ton of multicolored spells and just getting a treasure token every single time is really good value. You can just view the hideaway mechanic as a bonus. If you do hit a really expensive card we play in the deck, just hide away it under this card and you can pay 5 mana to cast it for free. Wood Elves, a 3 mana 1/1 elf creature that whenever it enters a battlefield allows us to search our library for any forest card and put it into play. In the budget mana version of this deck, we do play a lot of lands that have dual typing, meaning the lands are the forest type plus 1 additional basic land type. When you play Wood Elves, you can just go search for the forest plus the additional color on the land you need in future turns. Once again, both accelerating our mana and fixing our colors. And as you saw earlier in the video, we do do play a couple of cards that allow us to blink creatures. If you can start blinking a Wood Elves, you are able to get all the forests from your deck onto the battlefield and you will be generating an insane amount of value. And the last card in this section is Crystalline Crawler. It's a 4 mana, 1/1 artifact creature with a Converge mechanic. Converge basically means this creature will enter the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter for each color that was spent to cast this card. And it has an activated ability that allows us to remove 1 +1/+1 counter for this creature to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. The value and acceleration you get from Crystalline Crawler in a 5-color deck is absolutely ridiculous. 90% of the time we will be able to spend 4 different colors on Crystalline Crawler and it will enter with 4 counters, which then in turn allows us the next turn to just remove those 4 counters and add 4 mana to our mana pool, resulting in a real mana explosion. Just adding the 4 mana to your mana pool only requires you 1 extra mana to actually cast your commander for basically free, for just a small mana investment in an artifact creature. And whenever this creature doesn't have any counters anymore, it also has a tap ability. When we tap it, we can just put a +1/+1 counter on itself, which we can then again on instant speed remove at any time to generate 1 mana of any color. Next up, we have the support and card advantage section. The support cards are the cards that amplify everything this deck does. They help us go wide, generate extra tokens, generate extra value, and even though our commander will draw us about 7 million cards whenever we attack with it, we still do play some other cards in the deck that will grant us some sort of card advantage. Mana Cannons, a 3 mana enchantment that's basically made for multicolored decks. Whenever we cast any multicolored spell, Mana Cannons will deal X damage to any target, X being the amount of that spell's colors. This card is just absolutely fantastic in this deck. We can both use it whenever we play any multicolored thing to just start pinging creatures on the board we don't like and actually use it as some sort of a removal tool, or later in the game when we are casting like 3-4 multicolored spells in a single turn, we can even use it to start pinging opponents' faces and taking them out of the game with this. It's really hard without any gameplay to explain how good Mana Cannons really is. And it doesn't even matter if you cast cheap spells or really expensive spells, the only thing that matters is how many colors are in the mana cost. Painful Truths, a 3 mana sorcery speed spell with the Converge mechanic. Whenever you cast a spell, you get to draw X cards and lose X life. X being the amount of colors that was spent to cast this spell. 99% of the time you will be able to cast the spell using 3 colors, resulting in a 3 mana spell that will draw you 3 cards at the cost of 3 life. There isn't any similar spell in Magic that costs you 3 mana and will actually draw you 3 cards. Well, maybe there are, but they do have some crazy requirements, and this is basically just drawing us 3 cards for what we already want to do. Generate a ton of different colors worth of mana. Prosperous Partnership, a 3 mana enchantment that whenever it enters a battlefield will generate us 2 1/1 green and white creature tokens. So we get a multicolored enchantment and 2 multicolored tokens. For 3 mana, we get a total of 3 multicolored permanents, which is just perfect for our commander. Then on top of that, it has a really crazy activated ability. We are allowed to tap 3 untapped creatures we control to generate us a treasure token. And this card doesn't even care about us tapping tokens. We can tap any sort of creature. So if we cast our commander and we get to generate an army of robots, we can just start tapping them in pairs of 3s to start generating treasure tokens, which will result in us getting an absolutely insane amount of mana. The fact that this card already enters the battlefield accompanied by 2 creature tokens means you only need 1 additional creature to start generating treasure tokens. Honestly, another must-have card in this deck. Warleader's Skull, another one of the win cons we play in the deck. This card has 2 abilities and both help us win the game. First up, it will give all creatures we control +1/1. Our mana dorks will be buffed, our legendary creatures will be buffed, and our robots will also be buffed. When we then go for a swing, we will deal a ton more damage. And secondly, whenever a creature enters a battlefield under our control, this enchantment will deal 1 damage to each opponent. Really similar to Corpse Knight, whenever we cast our commander and we generate somewhere between 5 to 10 robot tokens whenever it enters, this enchantment will deal a ton of damage to each opponent, really dealing a huge hit to their life total. Their life totals will then be lower, your creatures will be buffed, you can then swing and just close out the game. Annie joins up, a 4 mana legendary enchantment from the Outlaws of Thunder Junction set. Whenever this enchantment enters the battlefield, it deals 5 damage to target creature. So basically, whenever we play this enchantment, we get to remove a creature on the board. Passively, if a triggered ability of a legendary creature we control would trigger, it triggers an additional time. And this honestly gets really crazy in this deck. Let me give you some examples. You cast a historic spell with Joyga on the field, you now get to draw 2 cards. You cast a multicolored spell with the general on the field, you now get 2 multicolor tokens. You get to generate a treasure token of Loto, you now get 2 treasure tokens. You play a legendary spell with Joda on the field, you now get 2 Joda triggers, allowing you to cheat 2 other legendary permanents into play. You attack Witcher Commander, drawing 7 million cards, now you get to draw 14 million cards. The benefits and value doubling on this card are just endless in this type of deck. Small little note, this won't double up the ETB trigger on your commander, generating the robots. Because whenever our commander enters a battlefield, it won't have any charge counters and it won't be a legendary creature, it will just be a legendary artifact. And this enchantment only doubles up on the triggers of legendary creatures. Just a fantastic multicolored enchantment that acts as removal and insane value doubling in this deck. Assemble the Legion, a 5 mana Boros enchantment. At the beginning of our upkeep, we get to put a muster counter on Assemble the Legion. Then for each muster counter on Assemble the Legion, we get to create a 1/1 white and red soldier token with haste. Assemble the Legion basically is an enchantment that has to be dealt with at some point, otherwise the amount of soldiers will just overwhelm your opponents. And okay, I get it, just generating a ton of 1/1 haste creatures swinging at your opponent is not that big of a deal, but all of these soldiers are multicolored permanents, so we will be generating more robots with them and drawing more cards with them. If your opponents don't have an answer for Assemble the Legion, it will just take over the game by itself. Trust me. Invasion of Alara, a 5 mana, 1 mana of each color battle card. Whenever this battle enters the battlefield, we get to flip the top cards of our library until we reveal 2 cards that cost 4 mana or less. Then we are allowed to cast one of those cards for free and add the other card to our hand. This in itself is already really good value because essentially you get a free spell cast and you get to draw a card. Then this battle will enter the battlefield under an opponent's control and it will have 7 toughness. You can then attack the battle instead of that opponent, and whenever it takes 7 damage, we get to flip it. When it flips, it instantly becomes a sorcery we get to cast for free, and it has some really game-breaking effects. Target player gets to draw 2 cards, we get to put an artifact from our hand onto the battlefield for free, we get to create a copy of a permanent we control, we get to distribute 3 +1/+1 counters on creatures we control, and we get to destroy target permanent an opponent controls. Yeah, the backside of this card is absolutely ridiculous and will give you a ton of value. It's really weird you get these 5 options, but all 5 of these options will have a use. If we could only play the front side of this card, I would already include it in the deck. The fact that you do get a little upside if you can manage to deal 7 damage to it. Our commander is a flying 7/15 body, by the way, so that's perfect. Is just a cherry on top. Kenrit, the Returned King. It's a 5 mana legendary creature with 5 activated abilities. 1 ability for each color pair. Kenrit probably is one of the most awesome 5 color commanders out there, so I just had to include it in the 99, even though it isn't a multicolored permanent. The abilities are just way too good, and once again, I love versatile cards. For 1 red mana, you can give all creatures haste and trample till the end of turn. Already really upping the aggression by giving haste, and the trample will allow you to close out games. For 2 mana, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Just a small little buff spell you can be using whenever you have any mana left. For 3 mana, you can gain 5 life. If you are under a ton of pressure, the 5 life might actually make a difference. For 4 mana, you can draw a card, just allowing you to get some card advantage whenever you have some mana left. And for 5 mana, you get to reanimate a creature just straight from your graveyard onto the battlefield. None of the options on Kenrit are broken, don't get me wrong, but the fact that you get all of these abilities on one single creature is just crazy. You can just adapt to the given board state you're in and use the option you need most at the given time. Kenrit honestly honestly is one of the most versatile cards ever printed. Tome of the Guild Pact, a really expensive 5 mana rock. We can tap this artifact to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. I know, paying 5 mana for a mana rock isn't really worth it, but they added a passive ability onto this one. Whenever we cast a multicolored spell, we get to draw a card. As you can imagine, in this deck we will be playing multicolored spells every single turn, and this card will just draw us between 1 to 3 cards every single turn. The mana it generates is just a nice little added benefit. That's not the reason why we play it. Ramos, Dragon Engine. It's a 6 mana colorless legendary artifact creature dragon. Whenever we cast a spell, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on the Ramos for each of that spell's colors. As you can imagine, in this deck, this will get out of hand really fast and you will have a huge colorless flying dragon body after a couple of turns. But we play it for the activated ability, which honestly is really easy to get to in this deck. By just removing a simple 5 +1/+1 counters, which is, yeah, we will get to that in one single turn easily. We get to add 10 mana to our mana pool. Yeah, I don't think I have to explain how good this card is in this deck. It's a huge colorless creature flying body that will keep on growing by just us doing what we're already about to do, cast colorless spells. And every single turn we will be able to just remove some counters for it and generate 10 mana, which we can then use to cast some of our more expensive spells and cast even more multicolor creatures, adding more counters onto Ramos. Ramos really is a value engine in itself, and yeah, just generating 10 mana is absolutely crazy. We even play a card in the deck that really will win us the game if we can generate a ton of mana. The card I'm talking about is Depth to the Deathless. In this deck, we don't really have a solid win con. We generate a ton of robot tokens, a ton of tokens with the other cards in our deck. We generate a ton of value. We can buff up our legendary creatures, but it's all like wishy-washy, and sometimes it will win us the game and sometimes it won't. That's why we play this card. One thing's for sure in this deck, and it is that later in the game you will be able to generate a huge amount of mana. Depth to the Deathless allows you to pay 4 mana plus X. Then each opponent will lose twice X life when you cast this, and you gain that much life. And usually later in the game you can just cast this for like about 10 mana and it will deal enough damage to take everyone out of the game. You can use things like Ramos, a ton of creature tokens combined with Enduring Vitality, Inga and Asika to generate you an immense amount of mana. Depth to the Deathless basically is a win con whenever you have a ton of mana, and if your opponents don't have a counter spell, it will just win you the game. Next up, we have the interaction and protection section. As you've seen by now, in this deck we can easily build our board with legendary creatures and a ton of creature tokens, but we actually do need ways to protect that strategy. In this section you will see the protection spells, counter magic, removal, and our own board wipes. An offer you can't refuse. It's a 1 mana card that allows us to counter target non-creature spell. In return, that spell's controller will get 2 treasure tokens. We mainly play this spell because it's a really efficient counter spell, only paying 1 mana to counter a non-creature spell. It does have the downside of generating your opponent's treasure tokens, but if you can counter a game-ending spell and just give them 2 treasures in return, it's a really good deal. As you can imagine, the main weakness of this deck is actually opponents wiping the board and destroying all our creatures, so we have to start over from 0. Most cards that wipe the board are non-creature spells, and an offer you can't refuse is just a fantastic and really efficient option to stop that from happening. Swords to Plowshares, a 1 mana instant speed spell that allows us to exile any creature on the board. As I keep mentioning, in every deck that plays white you should include this card. It's one of the most efficient removal spells ever printed in Magic. Play your removal, people. Arcane Denial, 2 mana counter spell that will target any spell on the stack. When we do, that spell's controller will get to draw 2 cards at the beginning of their next turn. At the beginning of our next turn, we also get to draw an additional card. The fact that you can counter any spell with a 2 mana counter spell already makes this card fantastic. And it's the same reasoning as an offer you can't refuse. Just giving an opponent 2 cards in return for countering a game-ending spell is still a really good deal. And on top of that, this card basically replaces itself by drawing us a card at the beginning of our next turn. Despark, a 2 mana instant speed spell that allows us to exile any permanent with mana cost 4 or greater. Since we are a 5-color deck, we do have access to any removal spell in Magic, and Despark honestly is one of my favorite removal spells ever printed. Usually the things you want to deal with that have the biggest impact on the game have a mana cost of more than 4. And just being able to exile these permanents permanents for only 2 mana on instant speed is a really fantastic deal. Golgari Charm, a 2 mana instant speed spell, and it's one of the charms of the original Ravnica set. And honestly, all of these charm cards are just fantastic cards that all have 3 options. First option allows us to give all creatures on the board -1/-1. This might be relevant against some really small token decks that go really wide. Second option allows us to destroy an enchantment on the board. So if an opponent controls a Ristic Study and Aura Shards, you can use this card to deal with that. And the third option, and the option you will be using most in this deck, is that we get to regenerate each creature we control. As I mentioned, if an opponent plays a board wipe, it's the biggest nightmare you can have in this deck because you will have to start rebuilding from 0. Instead of panicking and thinking about rebuilding, you can just cast a Golgari Charm, regenerate everything you control, board wipe will resolve, and everything will just be fine and survive the board wipe. All the options on this card are fantastic, and you will always have a use for Golgari Charm. Anguished Unmaking. 3 mana, 3 life, exile any non-land permanent on instant speed. Orzhov removal is just the best. Radiant Flames, a 3 mana sorcery speed spell with the Converge mechanic. This card will deal X damage to each creature on the board, X being the amount of colors that was spent to cast this spell. We are a creature based deck ourselves, but sometimes our opponents will just overwhelm us on the board and we will have to cast our own board wipe just to not lose the game. The fact that we are a 5-color deck means that we can actually choose how many colors we spend to cast Radiant Flames depending on the state of the board. If you have trouble dealing with a skewed Swarm player and they're all 1/1 creatures, just spend like 3 red mana on this spell, only 1 color is spent, and you will only wipe the 1/1 creatures. Your robot creatures will just survive. If you are losing on the board against a player that owns a lot of 3/3 beast tokens or whatever, just spend 3 different colors on this spell and you will be able to deal 3 damage to everything and reset the board. Once again, a really versatile card. Binding the Old Gods, a 4 mana saga. Whenever it enters the battlefield, we get to destroy target non-land permanent an opponent controls. Allows us to deal with creatures, planeswalkers, artifacts, enchantments, you name it, it deals with everything. On our next upkeep, we get to add a lore counter and we can search our library for a forest card and put it onto the battlefield, allowing us to accelerate our mana on top of a really good removal spell. And honestly, if this saga only had these 2 options, I'd still include it in the deck. A 4 mana removal spell and a way to filter lands out of your deck. And the third turn, this is on the battlefield, it will give all our creatures death touch until the end of turn. This option isn't really that relevant, but I suppose if you swing with 10 robot creatures and your opponents actually do have some blockers, the death touch might be really relevant, and your opponents will think twice about blocking your robots. And remember, as long as this saga is on the battlefield, it is an extra multicolored permanent for our infinite Guideline Station. More robots and more card draw. Ruinous Ultimatum. And yes, this really is an ultimate card. For 7 mana in really specific colors, we get a sorcery speed spell that allows us to destroy all non-land permanents we don't control. As I mentioned before, we don't have any combos in this deck and we don't have a clear win con. One thing's for sure, later in the game we will have access to a ton of mana and a Ruinous Ultimatum will just win you the game on the spot usually. If you already have some robots on the battlefield, you can just wipe the board, opponents won't have any blockers and you can swing in for lethal. And your opponent's boards will be wiped and they will have to start rebuilding from 0, while your board is unaffected by this type of board wipe. I know the colors on this spell are really specific for a 5-color deck, but later in the game we do have a ton of ways to filter our mana, be it Chromatic Lantern, Enduring Vitality, and you will be able to cast this, don't worry about it. And the last card in this section is Blasphemous Act, a 9 mana sorcery speed spell that will deal 13 damage to each creature on the board. And its mana cost is reduced by 1 generic mana for each creature that is on the board. This is one of the most efficient board wipes ever printed and you will be able to cast it for 1 red mana. Since when do you need a board wipe? That's right, when the board is filled with creatures. This is just another awesome way to reset the board if an opponent is overwhelming you, and the beautiful thing is 13 damage is enough to destroy most creatures. But our commander is a 7/15 creature, so a Blasphemous Act won't even scratch our space station. Next up we have the budget Manabase. As I mentioned before, this deck is built on a €100 budget. As all of you know, land lands are the most expensive cards in Magic. To make a 5-color deck work, you do need some really expensive lands, but I decided to make this budget 5-color mana base so you can actually play the deck without having to sell your car. That being said, this budget mana base isn't optimal and you will be slowed by 1 turn since a ton of the lands you play in this deck will enter tapped. But honestly, I prefer lands entering tapped but able to generate the colors we need so you can actually cast your spells. It's better to have a slower mana base, but actually a mana base that allows you to generate all 5 colors. After this section, I will be covering the optimized mana base where I didn't care about the budget, and that's the way this deck should be played if you want to push it to its limit. Also, fun fact, it's the first 5-color mana base I've ever built. I'll try to explain the decisions that I made, but bear with me. Command Tower, obviously the first land in the deck since it enters untapped and we can tap it for any color. Exotic Orchid, this land will allow us to tap for 1 mana of any color that a land an opponent controls can produce. In most games, this will be a 5-color land, depending on the pot you play in. Forbidden Orchid, another land that enters untapped and taps for 1 mana of any color. Whenever you do decide to tap this land for mana, an opponent will get a 1/1 colorless spirit token, so a small little downside on this one. Path of Ancestry, in this type of deck, it's a land that enters tapped but will tap for mana of any color, since our commander is a 5-color creature. Pillar of the Perunes, this card will tap for mana of any color, but we can only use it to cast multicolored spells. As you've seen by now, we do play a ton of multicolored spells in this deck, and this land honestly is an auto inclusion. Grand Colosseum, this land will enter the battlefield tapped and we can tap it to add 1 colorless mana to our mana pool or 1 mana of any color for the price of 1 life. This is basically City of Brass but entering tapped. Great Hall of the Citadel, this land will tap for 1 colorless mana, or by investing 1 mana into it and tapping it, we get to add 2 mana of any color combination to our mana pool, but we can only use that mana to cast a legendary spell. Like you've seen, we do play a ton of legendary creatures, so this land is perfectly fine in this deck. We play 4 check lands. These are 2-color lands that will enter the battlefield untapped if we do control a specific land type when they enter. All of the required lands for these type of fetch lands have forest in them. The main strategy is just to go up dual lands that have the forest typing or even a basic forest, and all the check lands we play in this deck will then enter the battlefield untapped. Green is the main color in this deck anyways. We play 2 of the cycle lands, which both have the forest typing, scaling really well with our check lands. We play 2 of the other dual land type cards that enter the battlefield tapped, but they also have the forest typing, so we can actually fetch them up with wood elves and we can make our check lands enter untapped with them. We play 2 Pain lands. They will tap for a colorless mana or 1 mana of any color at the cost of 1 life. We play a Terramorphic Expanse, a land that we can sacrifice to get any basic land from our deck onto the battlefield tapped. Really good with our check lands. We play an Escape Tunnel, which basically has the same effect, plus an additional little activated ability, which makes us able to sacrifice it to make a creature unblockable. We play 4 Scry lands, just lands that enter the battlefield tapped. When they do, allow us to scry 1. And once again, all of them have green in the combinations. We play 4 of the Vivid lands. These lands will enter the battlefield with 2 counters on them. We can remove a counter to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool, or they tap for the color they are in. These are honestly really fantastic lands that really will make your 5-color deck work on a budget. We play 5 of the Tri lands. These are lands that enter the battlefield tapped and will tap for 1 of 3 colors. And once again, all of these Tri lands have green in them. And last up, we play 1 of each basic land. Before we get into the actual upgrade section, where I will be talking about actual creatures and enchantments and other cards you can include to upgrade the deck, I will be going over the non-budget mana base for this type of deck. I'll be going over it pretty fast because most players that actually do have the budget to spend on these type of lands actually know why these lands are good. First up, we play 8 shock lands. These lands enter the battlefield untapped at the cost of 2 life, and they all have the basic land types. Then we play 8 fetch lands. The main purpose of these fetch lands is to go fetch up the shock lands. Honestly, just playing fetch lands and shock lands already makes the deck insanely good. A Mana Confluence, a City of Brass, and a Starting Town. These are all lands that will tap for 1 mana of any color, but they do come at quite a hefty price. We also play a Plaza of Heroes, which does tap for mana of any color for legendary spells, or it taps for mana in the color color of any legendary creature we control. And on top of that, it has an activated ability that even functions as some sort of a protection tool. A reflecting pool, Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth. This will make sure all our lands are able to tap for green mana, really helping with our color fixing. And we also play 6 of the Triomes. These are 3 color lands that have the basic land typing, so we can go fetch them up with our fetch lands, and later in the game you can even cycle them if you don't need them to draw a card. And we still have the following cards from the budget lands in there: a Command Tower, a Forbidden Orchard, and 5 basic lands, 1 of each type. If you go to the Moxfield Decklist, the main deck will have the budget mana base in it. But if you enable decks, go to the considering section, you can actually see a part that says land upgrades, and this is where I will put all the cards I just mentioned in this section if you're interested in that. And for all of you that are still watching the video and really want to push this 5-color spacecraft to its limit, let's get into the upgrade section. Amulet of Vigor, a really simple 1 mana artifact, and as long as this card is on the battlefield, all our permanents enter the battlefield untapped. It doesn't even matter if you're not playing the budget version of this deck, and if you are playing the really expensive mana base, having your shocklands enter untapped without having to pay the life for it, or even able to make Triomes enter untapped, is just really good in this deck. Also keep in mind, whenever you play your commander, all the robots will enter tapped. If you do have an Amulet of Vigor, they will be untapped instead, and you will instantly be able to use them to station your commander. Since we aren't on a budget anymore, we will be changing around a ton of the mana dorks in this deck. The first one I'd upgrade is Birds of Paradise, a simple 1 mana 0/2 flying creature that will tap for mana of any color. Later in the game, if someone is swinging a 2020 flying dinosaur at you, you can even use this little mana dork to block it. Since in the budgetless version you will be playing a lot faster, 1 mana mana dorks actually work really well in this type of deck. Delighted Halfling, a 1 mana 1/2 mana dork that can be tapped for colorless mana. Or you can tap it to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, but you can only spend it on legendary creatures. When you cast a legendary spell with mana generated by this effect, it also can't be countered. The second best 1-drop mana dork ever printed. The next card is the best mana dork ever printed and one of my personal favorite cards. Deathrite Shaman. It's a 1 mana 1/2 creature that has more text than most planeswalkers do. First up, it has a hybrid mana cost, making it a 1-drop multicolor creature that will count towards infinite Guideline Station. We can tap this creature to exile a land card from any graveyard and add 1 mana to our mana pool of any color. In the budget version of the deck, you can't play this since we have no ways to get lands into our graveyard. But in the non-budget version, we do play a total of 8 fetch lands, which at some point will end up in your graveyard. When they do, you can just use Deathrite Shaman as a mana dork and produce mana of any color. For 1 black mana, we can exile target instant or sorcery spell from a graveyard and make each opponent lose 2 life. And for 1 green mana, untapping it, we can exile a creature card from a graveyard and we will gain 2 life. The life loss and life gain on these abilities isn't really that relevant, but what is really relevant is that nowadays a ton of decks in modern day Magic rely on using their graveyard. You play versus a Necrobloom player, you can just start exiling their lands and they won't have access to it anymore. You play versus a Marin Reanimator deck that wants to reanimate an Elesh Norn, 1 mana, tap the Deathrite, Elesh Norn is gone forever. You play against a Vivi deck and they want to flashback a Past in Flames, pay 1 mana, tap your Deathrite and the Past in Flames is gone forever. Graveyard hate in modern day Magic can really win you games nowadays. If you listen to me ramble about Deathrite Shaman for 2 full minutes and you still don't like this card, please let me know in the comments below. I'd really love to see the imperfections in this card, but in my eyes it's just the perfect card ever since it was released. Noble Hierarch, a 1 mana 0/1 creature we can use to tap for 1 mana in any of the banned colors. Just another really efficient 1 mana mana dork. On top of that, it also has the Exalted mechanic, meaning whenever a creature we control attacks alone, it will get +1/1 until the end of turn. Exalted isn't really going to be relevant in this deck because we will be swinging with a ton of creatures at the same time, but hey, it's still a really good mana dork. Bloom Tender. This 2 mana 1/1 mana dork will tap for 1 mana of any color amongst permanents we control. This is basically Fey Burrow Elder, but just a ton better. Baseline, this card will tap for 1 mana, which is honestly perfectly fine on a 2 mana card. But in this type of deck where we do play a ton of multicolored permanents, usually this 2 mana creature will tap for 3 to 5 mana, which honestly is absolutely ridiculous in this type of deck. I'd love to include this in the main budget deck list, but this card is just way too expensive nowadays. Cyclonic Rift. This 2 mana instant speed spell has recently been added to the Game Changers list. For 2 mana, we get to bounce any non-land permanent we don't control, which honestly can be cast for 2 mana if you really need to bounce something or you lose the game. But the main reason I'd include this in the deck is its overload cost. For 7 mana, we can overload the spell and return every non-land permanent we don't control to the controller's hands, basically functioning as some sort of a one-sided board reset where everything just gets bound and you can just start swinging with your creatures. Your opponents will be stuck with their most valuable permanents in their hands and they will have to start rebuilding. There is a reason why they added this card to the Game Changers list. Lotus Cobra, a 2 mana snake creature with an awesome landfall ability. Whenever a land enters a battlefield under our control, we get to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. In most cases, this card basically gives us 1 mana of any color every single turn if you don't miss a land drop. But in the non-budget version of this deck, as you saw, we will be playing a huge amount of fetch lands. You play a fetch land, you crack it to go get another land, that's 2 landfall triggers on Lotus Cobra. Whenever Lotus Cobra gets combined with fetch lands, the value is just ridiculous and you will explode the amount of mana you have. Nature's Lore and 3 Visits. Both cards have the same effect, but they have a different name, so we can include both in the deck. They allow you to go fetch a forest out of your deck and put it onto the battlefield. It doesn't even enter tapped. And it doesn't even have to be a basic forest, so you can use this to go fetch any shockland that has the forest typing. Since in the non-budget version of this deck we want to be accelerating as fast as we can, we have to play these 2 options in the deck. Time Thief, probably one of the most broken artifact cards ever printed. For only 2 mana, you get an artifact with an activated ability that allows you to sacrifice 5 artifacts to take an extra turn after this one. Yeah, this is not a fake card, it is an actual real card. If you play your commander, you will get a huge amount of artifacts. You can then just tap Time Thief, sacrifice 5 of them, and you will get an extra turn. If in that extra turn you can then find a way to blink your commander, you will get some new robots and you will be able to tap Time Thief again and take another turn. Time Thief really is a card that's really easy to chain infinite turns with, and it's honestly a really broken card. I'd never include it in the deck because I really don't like chaining infinite turn effects, but if you want to push this deck to its limit, you have to include it for sure. Aura Shards, another 3 mana enchantment that is on the Game Changers list. Whenever a creature enters a battlefield under your control, you get to destroy target artifact or enchantment on the battlefield. I mentioned this in my Necrobloom video. With Aura Shards, you have 2 choices. Or you can choose to include it in your deck and win a ton of games, but you will lose all your friends. Or you can choose to be a decent human being, keep this card in your trade binder, not play it, and have a really fun game of Magic. All jokes aside, Aura Shards is one of the most oppressive cards ever printed. If you've ever played with Aura Shards or played against an Aura Shards, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Just imagine having this on the battlefield, casting your commander, generating 6 robots, and you can just destroy everyone's mana rocks, enchantments, whatever. It's just a really oppressive card. That being said, it is also a really strong card and it will win you games. Two-Headed Hellkite, a 6 mana, 5 colored, 5/5 flying haste menace dragon. And honestly, it's really simple. Whenever this card attacks, we get to draw 2 cards. The fact that this card has haste means that it will generate you card draw immediately on the turn it comes down. It's honestly not that fancy of a card, but it does get the job done in generating you a really huge body and generating you some card advantage. Perfect fit for any 5 color deck, but I couldn't fit it into the budget of the main deck. Craterhoof Behemoth, a classic win con you can totally play in this deck. As I mentioned in the main video, this deck doesn't have a straight win con. We actually have to build our board and fair and square swing with our creatures. Playing this 8 mana 5/5 haste ginormous monster will help you close out games, because whenever it enters a battlefield, all creatures you control will get +X and trample equal to the number of creatures you control. If you control 8 robots, for example, and you play a Crater Hoof, all creatures you control will get +9/+9 and trample. Usually whenever you cast a Crater Hoof with a couple of creatures on the board, you instantly can win the game. Finale of Devastation. For 2 green mana and X, you get to tutor your graveyard or your library for any creature card with mana value X or less. This is just my favorite tutor card you can use to tutor up any creature you need at the given board state. If you need some card draw, just tutor up a Nif Mizzet. If you want to start blinking your commander, just tutor up an Abuelo. If you are about to make 1,000,000 robot tokens and you want to win the game on the spot, go tutor up a Corpse Knight. If you already have 1,000,000 robots, just go tutor up a Jetmir and you can instantly win the game. The fact that you can use this card to both search your library or your graveyard means you can actually use it later in the game to recurse some of the value creatures you lost over the course of the game. And the main reason why I would include it in the deck is because if X is 10 or more, all your creatures will get +X/+X and haste until the end of turn. So not only a tutor, but also a game finishing pump haste enabling spell. And as you've seen in the video, in this deck we will easily be able to generate more than 12 mana to pay for this spell. And the last card in the upgrade section is Scion of Draco. It's a whopping 12 mana 4/4 flying artifact creature and it has the domain mechanic. Domain basically means that the cost of this spell is reduced by 2 generic mana for each basic land type amongst lands we control. With the amount of fetch lands and shock lands you can play in this deck, you can easily guarantee you controlling all 5 land types and you will be able to cast this absolutely game-breaking creature for just 2 mana. It's not game-breaking because of the body of course, but because of the passive ability. Each creature we control will get a buff depending on its colors. If it's white, it will get Vigilance. If it's blue, it will get Hexproof. If it's black, it will gain Lifelink. If it's red, it will gain First Strike. And if it's green, it will also gain Trample. As you can imagine, with all the multicolored creatures you saw in this deck, it's just absolutely ridiculous value. Just imagine playing your commander and it actually being a Vigilance, Lifelink, First Strike, Trample, Hexproof body instead of the usual 7/15 flying body. This honestly is one of the more fun and unique creatures you can include in the deck, but you do have to be running the fetch and shock lands to make this work. And that's it for my in-depth Infinite Guideline Station deck. Honestly, one of the most unique and flavorful commanders I've ever worked on. In fact, this is the first 5-color deck I've ever built in my entire life and I'm really happy with how the result turned out. If you made it this far in the video, comment a rocket emoji so I know you're a part of the late game crew of these type of videos. I hope I inspired at least one person with this video to build this awesome 5-color spaceship commander. As always, thanks for watching and I will see you in the next one.